Okay guys, here we're going to go over peening of holes a little bit. This is extremely hard to do very accurately, and it's hard to see and feel, but if you can see, I can rock this axle a little bit. And what we're trying to do is make it so these axles do not rock, but still slide very slightly. And that's very important. That's on all shafts of a motor. So, peening tool. Peening tool slides in. We screw it in like so. I will try to make sure that the shaft is centered. It is extreme, like you can, if you get it all the way to the top or bottom of the hole, you can manipulate it a little bit so that it's not centered, but we want to make sure we're centered. We get it centered, and you give it a little crank, you can feel it, you can see it move a little bit. So you want to do that to both sides. Most chassis are flat a lot of times until you peen them, and then you can peen them and then you can make them go a little bit up or down. So as you can see, I didn't quite get all of it. We go back and we re-hit it again. Just squeeze a little more. Now you will likely over tighten the holes a little bit before you get it perfect. That's just kind of the way this goes. See, so now it doesn't wiggle on that side. It doesn't wiggle on that side. It's got a little bit of tightness to it. You can actually feel just a little bit of play on this side. This side's nice and snug, so I'm going to tighten this side just a little more. Now, still got a fair bit of snug. You can feel it's snug. It's not, there's a little bit of drag, and on the front axle, that's not a little bit of drag is not necessarily a bad thing. But I can still feel this side has just a little play in it. Just didn't quite tighten it up enough. So, we're going to hit that again. And now we're definitely snug. Like now it doesn't even, I gotta force it through there. But we have no walk now. So now what I will typically do is I will find a slightly larger axle. You know, a lot of guys have different tungsten sizes that are slightly larger. That one's not slightly larger. I just have some axles laying off to the side here that are just out of old cars. And I'll just push through a slightly larger axle, just to, you know, this one's got a little bit, not much, still. An axle graveyard, basically. This one's definitely, this one's a little tight. You can feel it's just tight. So I'll just run that through back and forth just a little tiny bit. Just to open it up just a hair. Now this will slide a little bit easier. And we don't have any, you know, I mean, you can feel a tiny little bit if you really yank on it. But there's really no movement there. And what that does is that stops the car. It helps it so the car turns when it wants to. Still a little bit there. This one side's giving me a little bit of a problem. And that's kind of the way peening goes. You just sit here and play with it and play with it and play with it, and eventually it'll be perfect. You know, you just don't want to make it too tight, especially on the front axle. Some people think you can go really tight and just let it clamp down on the axle, and then you hit the wall, and then because the axle doesn't slide, the rim pushes in against the chassis and everything jams. So you can't peen this too tight. Still want it to, you still want this to be able to happen, So yeah, it's a little sticky still. So it's a little sticky still and that happens. You can just kind of rub the axle a little bit. And a lot of times it just frees up naturally. Like it's getting nice and loose now. And it's about where I would keep it. There's still a little bit of snugness on it, but there's absolutely no movement on it. So that is how I would peen all of my, the rear axle. Obviously you don't want a bind there. And the axle shafts you don't want to bind, but you want them to have as little play as possible. And it's really hard to show exactly the play. The front axle is the easiest one to see the play, so that's why I'm going over with the front axle. So that is the peening section of how to peen a chassis, and I'll be back soon.